In our headlines on this Tuesday, August 5th, here in South Korea, a controversial media reform bill has lawmakers across the aisle locking horns at the parliament since Monday. And the presidential office here seeks to advance ties with Beijing based on its firm alliance with Washington. The remark was shared to clarify an earlier comment by Foreign Minister Cho Han during an interview with the Washington Post. Meanwhile, South Korea's consumer prices rise 2.1% on year in July, driven by processed food costs. We start at the National Assembly today, where lawmakers across the aisle remain at odds over media reform that is, sought by the ruling party. Now, in response, the opposition party launched a filibuster starting Monday afternoon. For more on the situation there, I have our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun standing by live. Hae-ryun, welcome. So, what's the latest there?
Good afternoon, Sunny. So it's been around 25 hours since the filibuster began at around 4 p.m. on Monday, with the opposition People Power Party arguing against and the ruling Democratic Party speaking in support of the media reform bill presented at yesterday's plenary session. That filibuster has now come to an end after a motion submitted by the ruling Democratic Party passed with the required supermajority. Under parliamentary rules, a filibuster can only be forcibly ended 24 hours after it begins, and only with the approval of at least 3/5 of sitting lawmakers, which is 180 members. Today's vote was conducted by paper ballot, as is customary for motions to end the debate, a process that takes longer than the standard electronic voting system used for most bills. Following the end of the filibuster, the DP immediately passed the media reform bill. So of the 180 votes cast, 178 lawmakers voted for and 2 voted against. And it appears that the PPP did not participate in the vote at all.
Right, I see. Hae-ryun, what exactly is the media reform bill that the filibuster was launched for?
Right. So the media reform bill introduced at yesterday's plenary session is an amendment of the country's Broadcasting Act, and it's one of the highly contentious 3 media reform bills that the DP is backing. The media reform bill seeks a major overhaul of the governance structure at South Korea's public broadcasters, such as expanding the number of board members and introducing a new system for selecting CEOs. The DP argues that the change would make broadcaster leadership more independent from political power by including members recommended not only by the ruling and opposition parties, but also by civil society. But the PPP fiercely opposes the move, saying it would give the ruling party undue influence over media and potentially infringe on press freedom.
To boost press freedom and independence, the bill makes CEO appointments more transparent and democratic. The 3 broadcasting control bills can be seen as a prelude to the dictatorship of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Before long, they will take control of the general programming cable channels in the same way, even though those are not included for now.
Hae-ryun, you mentioned that today is the last day of the July extraordinary session. So what happens to the other bills on the agenda?
That's right. So the other bills will carry over into the August session, with a plenary session likely to be scheduled towards the end of the month. The PPP has vowed to launch filibusters against every single one of the 4 contentious bills remaining on the agenda. So there are 2 other media reform bills, as well as the so-called yellow envelope bill that limits employer action on striking union members, and a revision of the Commercial Act. The second media reform bill was introduced just a few minutes ago, actually, and the PPP launched yet another filibuster. The DP, on the other hand, remains committed to these reforms, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. That's all I have for now, so back to you, Sunny.
All right, Hae-ryun, thank you for the latest from the Parliament, and do keep us posted. Moving on then, Prime Minister Kim Min-seok says last week's tariff deal with the U.S. was a meaningful outcome considering the challenges faced. Presiding over a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday, in place of President Lee Jae-myung, who is currently on holiday, Kim thanked the country's ministers for protecting what he called key interests for the agriculture and livestock industries. Now, his remarks reaffirmed the government's stance that no concessions were made with regard to Korea's rice and beef markets during tariff talks with the U.S. The presidential office here is seeking to advance ties with Beijing based on its firm alliance with Washington. The statement shared earlier on this Tuesday follows a comment by Foreign Minister Cho Hyun in an interview with the Washington Post, during which he referred to China becoming, quote, somewhat problematic with its neighbors. The top office claims Cho's remarks sought to reaffirm commitment to constructive ties with Beijing for regional peace and prosperity, despite differences. The body of a North Korean man found on the shore of Incheon City's Seongmo-do Island in late June will be cremated here. Now, this is according to Seoul's Unification Ministry and follows North Korea's failure to respond to South Korea's earlier proposal for the body transfer via the truce village of Panmunjom at 3 p.m. on this Tuesday. Pyongyang has remained silent. In other news, inflation was up 2.1% on-year in July, driven by processed food costs. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young covers the latest findings.
Korea's consumer prices saw an increase in the 2% range in July for the second straight month. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 2.1% in July year-on-year. Inflation had remained above the Bank of Korea's 2% target for 4 consecutive months through April, subsequently seeing a dip in May before edging up again in June.
While the rise in agricultural, livestock, and fishery product prices expanded due to heat waves and heavy rain, the slowdown in the pace of increases for personal services, excluding dining out, alongside a shift to a decline in petroleum prices, led to a 0.1 percentage point decrease from the previous month.
Prices of processed food products jumped over 4% due to factory price increases, adding 0.35 percentage points to July's overall inflation. Agricultural product prices edged down 0.1%, however, with a notable soaring of watermelon prices by over 20%. The agency noted that extreme heat and heavy rainfall resulted in unfavorable supply conditions, while demand rose sharply. Prices of seafood products rose over 7%, while mackerel prices climbed more than 12%. The agency points to a decline in catches caused by rising sea temperatures. Prices of livestock grew 3.5%, including a significant increase in domestic beef, which is highly sought after thanks to livelihood recovery consumption coupons distributed by the government. In contrast, oil prices fell 1%, reversing an increase in the previous month amid falling international crude prices. During a review of price trends on the same day, the Bank of Korea noted that prices of farm produce are expected to rise rapidly due to unfavorable weather conditions. It plans to closely monitor the inflation path in response to high uncertainties surrounding external conditions. The central bank also added that a significant slowdown in price growth could occur this month, affected by planned bill discounts and other services by major mobile carriers. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
A new task force that is made up of top government officials and corporate leaders launched its first meeting on this Tuesday to chart a strategic map to tangible economic growth. Our economic correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Deputy Prime Minister for Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul says businesses are at the core of the Lee Jae-myung administration's growth vision, which seeks, quote, real growth. He was speaking Tuesday as the new Growth Strategy Task Force held its first meeting with Koo leading, joined by top officials and business leaders, including SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won, who also heads the Korea Chamber of Commerce.
We now need to focus on more fundamental economic growth. I believe the next 5 years are Korea's last real opportunity to transition into a super innovative economy.
One key agenda item was easing legal risks for companies. The government plans to reduce criminal liability for CEOs, including in breach of trust cases, and shift towards fines and civil compensation. Minor violations without intent or gross negligence could be exempt from criminal charges altogether. But penalties for serious offenses such as unfair trading or safety violations will be strengthened. The task force also reviewed the outcome of the recent Korea-US tariff deal. Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan said the agreement eased uncertainty for exporters, especially in autos, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, and helped preserve Korea's competitiveness in the U.S. market, which accounts for nearly 20% of Korean exports. Even if new tariffs are introduced, Korea will retain most favored nation treatment, ensuring it's not disadvantaged compared to Japan or the EU. Officials also again confirmed no new concessions were made on beef or rice, though future talks could address quarantine procedures such as for U.S. apples. Chairman Choi Tae-won welcomed the deal but urged the government to follow through on the details and ensure both sides maximize investment synergy. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has pledged efforts to support the journey to healing from the atomic bombings on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago on this month. Taking to Facebook on Tuesday, he also conveyed his deepest condolences to the victims and their families. Tens of thousands of Koreans were among those killed or left with lasting health consequences. He also made reference to South Korea's Special Act on the support for Korean atomic bomb victims enacted in 2017, calling it a practical foundation for assistance, but acknowledged that more needs to be done. A war of words is taking place between U.S. President Donald Trump and India as he accuses the country of raking in profits from the resale of Russian oil, despite the alarming death toll in Ukraine. Our Pyongyang reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump is turning up the pressure on India just days before a 25% reciprocal tariff is set to take effect on August 7th and the U.S. set ceasefire deadline between Russia and Ukraine of August 8th. In a post on social media, Trump accused India of making huge profits from buying and reselling Russian oil, while turning a blind eye to how many people are dying in Ukraine, saying he would be substantially raising the tariffs paid by India to the U.S. The move is widely viewed as part of a dual strategy, pressuring India while indirectly targeting Russia by going after one of its key oil customers.
So what he said very clearly is that it is not acceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing the oil from Russia.
In an official statement, Indian spokesperson Randir Jaiswal said the targeting of India was unfair and unreasonable, explaining that India had turned to Russian oil only after traditional suppliers redirected shipments to Europe following the Ukraine conflict. He also pointed out that the U.S. still imports chemicals and minerals from Russia for its nuclear and EV industries, and that India will take all necessary steps to safeguard its national interest and economic security. Russia, for its part, dismissed the moves. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said no tariff wars or sanctions can halt the natural course of history, adding that Russia will deepen ties with the global south and resist the unlawful unilateral sanctions. Meanwhile, U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is scheduled to visit Moscow on August 6th, possibly to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, a move seen as an attempt to push for progress on a ceasefire. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Russia has announced intentions to step away from a missile treaty that the U.S. accuses it of violating for over a decade. Our Choi Soo-hyung explains.
Russia says it will no longer be bound by a treaty on the deployment of intermediate-range missiles. On Monday local time, the Russian Foreign Ministry claimed the U.S. has been deploying intermediate-range missiles in Europe and Asia. Moscow said the move is a response to new threats. The INF Treaty, signed in 1987 between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, banned the production, testing and deployment of ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. In 2019, during U.S. President Donald Trump's first term, Washington pulled out of the agreement, arguing Moscow had long been violating the treaty. Russia denied accusations of violations, continuing to hold back on developing missiles banned under the treaty. Moscow's statement on Monday followed President Trump's order issued 3 days before to reposition 2 U.S. nuclear submarines in response to the deputy head of Russia's Powerful Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev's remarks about the risk of war between Washington and Moscow. Medvedev also warned an ex to expect further steps tying the foreign ministry's announcement to what he called NATO countries' anti-Russia policy. NATO is stepping up its support for Ukraine, starting with the Netherlands. The alliance plans to purchase US-made weapon systems. Valued at around $579 million, the aid package will include missiles for the Patriot air defense system.
The Dutch are just the first of many. You're going to see a series of announcements in the coming weeks. When we announced this facility that allowed our NATO allies to buy U.S. equipment and provide that to Ukraine for their defense, we had a lot of our allies raise their hand and line up.
Ukraine has also continued its offensive, striking 5 Russian fighter jets in Russian-occupied Crimea. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed Ukrainian forces are also facing mercenaries from China, Pakistan and Africa. Chesyang, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, Hamas says it will return to the dialogue table if the number of aid trucks into Gaza is substantially increased. Our Ising-jae has the latest.
Palestinian militant group Hamas is open to restarting peace talks with Israel. However, the precondition to returning to negotiations is the entry of at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into the Gaza Strip. According to Al Jazeera, Gaza officials report that over 22,000 aid trucks are currently waiting outside the enclave, while an average of just 84 trucks have been allowed in daily since Israel eased restrictions on July 27th. Humanitarian organizations have warned that at least 600 trucks per day are required to meet basic needs. Gaza's health ministry said Monday that 6 more people, including a child, had died from starvation in the previous 24 hours, bringing the total number of starvation-related deaths since the start of the conflict to 181, including 94 children. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that he would convene his security cabinet this week in order to discuss how his military will proceed in Gaza and meet all his war goals.
We must continue to stand together and fight together to achieve all our war objectives: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and the assurance that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. Later this week, I will convene the cabinet to instruct the IDF on how to achieve these 3 objectives, all of them without exception.
Meanwhile, according to a report by Axios on Monday, more than a dozen House Democrats have signed a letter calling on the Trump administration to formally recognize a Palestinian state. The latest push signals a renewed effort among some U.S. lawmakers to support Palestinian statehood, with at least 1 Democrat planning to introduce a pro-statehood resolution in Congress. Ising-jae, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, the southern city of Gyeongju is seeking to ensure that language is not a barrier to travel for foreigners there during the APEC leaders' meeting later this autumn. Our An Sung-jin has more.
A taxi driver wearing a shirt, vest, and tie embroidered with a Gyeongju city symbol welcomes a foreign guest. Speaking through a smartphone app, the guest tells the driver his destination.
Please take me to the Bulguksa temple.
It is translated automatically on the driver's cell phone. What the driver says to the customer is also translated immediately. This two-way AI translator has been provided to around 1,000 taxi drivers in the Gyeongju area ahead of APEC 2025 Korea.
Since we have the translation application ready, we can communicate with foreign guests and take them to destinations more easily.
Gyeongsang-mukdo Province has started its K-Miso City project, which stands for My Innovated Smart Open City, for foreign visitors ahead of the APEC Economic Leaders meeting in November. The province says it's a civic movement with the aim of encouraging people to revisit Korea. Key tasks aim to transform aspects of society to create a smart and open city. The project is also set to improve public transport services, lodging facilities, and traditional markets. With events like APEC Plogging and APEC Clean Day, citizens will clean the streets to make sure the city is as clean as it can be.
We try to set our smiles, kindness, and cleanliness as our standard practice from the service industry to daily life. This will create a smart and safe city for everyone.
Since the voluntary participation of citizens is essential for the successful hosting of the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, the province plans to promote the campaign through civic education. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Poland announced that checks at Poland's borders with Germany and Lithuania will be extended to block irregular migration and close transit routes from Russia and Belarus. Polish Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński said Sunday that the regulation to prolong controls had been formally submitted to the European Commission as required under EU rules. The checks, initially introduced on July 7th and originally due to expire on August 5th, will now remain in force until October 4th. Kierwiński explained that the strengthened barriers on Poland's eastern frontier with Belarus and Russia have largely blocked migrant paths, shifting the flow toward Lithuania and Latvia. The expanded checks aim to intercept cross-border transit before migrants reach the German border. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk framed the extension as a defensive response to Germany's tightening of asylum admissions. In the United States, around 3,200 workers from Boeing's defense unit went on strike for the first time in nearly 3 decades on Monday after rejecting a contract offer from the company. Members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers District 837 walked off the job across Boeing's facilities in St. Louis and St. Charles, Missouri, and Mascoutah, Illinois, staging their first strike since 1996. They rejected Boeing's contract offer, which included a 20% general wage increase, a $5,000 ratification bonus, additional vacation, and sick leave. The workers cited unresolved issues with overtime eligibility and scheduling provisions. Dame Stella Remington, the UK's first publicly named Director General of MI5 and the first known female leader of any national intelligence agency, died on Sunday, aged 90. She joined MI5 in 1969 and worked her way up to become Director General in 1992. Paying tribute, the current MI5 Director General said her leadership ushered in a new era of openness and transparency about the work MI5 does. After retiring, Remington was made a Dame Commander of the Order of the Bath in 1996 and went on to write best-selling spy novels featuring fictional MI5 and CIA agents. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Heatwave warnings have been issued for most parts of the country. The daytime temperature rose to 33 degrees Celsius in Seoul and 35 degrees in Daegu. Tomorrow it will stop at 28 degrees in Seoul with rain during the day. Tomorrow it will rain all over the country again. In particular, heavy rain of up to 100 millimeters will fall in the eastern parts of Gyeongju, inland areas of Gangwon-do and the Chungcheong-do provinces. And up to 80 millimeters of heavy rain will also fall in Seoul. Special care should be taken to keep safe and prevent any damage. The morning will start warm tomorrow at 27 degrees in Seoul and Busan, 28 degrees in Jeju. Daily highs will go up to 28 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 34 degrees in Gyeongju. Strong rain will mostly stop on Thursday morning and tropical nights will finally cool down from Friday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at the Sahir in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session.